The neighborhood whispered with the disquieting hush of early autumn. Leaves, like a child's forgotten toys, lay scattered on the ground, each one a tiny story of change. My house sat nestled in the corner with a gentle sort of resilience, its walls painted by years of sun and storms. The garden, my sanctuary, bloomed with a riot of colors, a testament to both nature's caprice and my patience. At its heart stood a grand silver maple, limbs stretched towards the heavens, roots deep in the earth like an old sage contemplating the world. This was my peace until Karen moved in across the street. Karen was the embodiment of all things HOA. She wore her authority like a badge of honor, her eyes scanning for deviations from her prescribed perfection. The neighborhood had seen her kind before, but she was relentless, armed with bylaws and a pen poised to document every infraction. Her first targets were small: a basketball hoop left carelessly near the curb, a garden gnome with a chipped hat. Her notes, delivered with the precision of a surgical strike, bore the coldness of ink on paper. Neighbors grumbled but complied, their grins tight with unspoken words. I watched, offering smiles of understanding, my hands digging into the rich soil of my garden with renewed devotion. It didn't take long for her gaze to turn towards my maple. She saw it not as a majestic guardian, but as an intruder, daring to spill beyond the confines of my garden. Her letters began to land in my mailbox, each one more insistent, demanding the tree's restraint or removal. I read them with the calm of one who knows the rhythm of the seasons, who understands that nature obeys no man-made decree. Her persistence was impressive, almost admirable in its single-minded folly. She visited, heels clicking on my walkway, carrying the weight of her disapproval like a storm cloud. Her words were clipped, her arguments tethered to the safety and order she so idolized. I nodded along, my silence cultivated over years of tending to things that grow wild and free. Time, much like the leaves, began to fall away. The tree stood firm, a silent testament to endurance. I pruned and cared for it, always mindful yet defiant in my quiet way. Karen, undeterred, escalated her efforts, the cadence of her complaints a relentless drumbeat. Then, one morning, the quiet shattered. The sound of chainsaws and shouts pierced the dawn, a cacophony that set the birds to flight. I stepped outside to see men, strangers to this place, encircling my maple with intent. My heart clenched, not with anger, but with a deep, unyielding sadness. Karen stood at the periphery, arms crossed, her satisfaction barely concealed. The tree fell with a slow, deliberate grace, as if bowing out from a stage it had graced too long. Its descent was a symphony of splintering wood and rustling leaves, a final protest against the inevitable. But in its fall, it found its own irony. The maple's limbs reached across the boundary, a last defiant embrace, and settled atop Karen's roof with a thud that echoed through the neighborhood. Nature, it seemed, had delivered its verdict. I watched as Karen's composure cracked, her face a canvas of disbelief and fury. The neighbors gathered, an audience to this unexpected twist, their murmurs a blend of shock and schadenfreude. In that moment, I understood the quiet power of patience. Nature had spoken, and its voice was far louder than any letter or law. As Karen stood amid the wreckage, I returned to my garden, the earth welcoming my hands once more. The air, lighter now, whispered of things yet to come. Karen's world is one of order and rigidity, where everything must bend to her will. Chaos is her nemesis, and I had unknowingly become its avatar. The felled tree, a monument to her overreach, lay sprawled across her perfectly manicured lawn, stubbornly resisting her attempts to tidy the disorder it caused. It was a fitting image. The once proud oak, now a tangled mess of branches and leaves, stretching like accusing fingers toward her precious house. The aftermath had barely settled when the letters began to appear. The first was slipped beneath my door in the early morning gloom, its edges sharp as if to mimic the sting it intended, a citation for my hedge, supposedly infringing on the sidewalk by half an inch. An absurdity, really, considering Karen's own bushes often spilled over the curb like boisterous revelers at a street fair. Yet, I knew these citations were not truly about hedges or sidewalks. They were about control. More letters followed, each one more laughably petty than the last, a demand to repaint my mailbox, which she claimed clashed with the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood, a notice about the color of my curtains, visible through the front windows and apparently an affront to community standards. She seemed to have a rule for everything, a holy scripture of suburban perfection that she alone interpreted. Meanwhile, gossip slithered through the neighborhood like a serpent, coiling around each doorstep with whispers of my supposed defiance. Karen, in her role as self-appointed oracle, spun tales of my negligence and disrespect, a narrative eagerly consumed by those who thrived on the minutiae of other people's lives. I could feel the weight of their stares. The silent judgments passed as I walked down the street, a procession of eyes assessing my every step. But their scrutiny was a soft breeze compared to the storm that raged within Karen's mind. In quieter moments, I wondered what drove her to such lengths. Was it an insatiable need for control, or something deeper? An emptiness she sought to fill with regulations and decrees. Her world was one of rigid lines and unyielding boundaries, where even the slightest deviation was a threat. I was a wild card in her deck, and she could not abide the unpredictability I represented. Her retaliations grew more absurd with each passing day. A notice about the length of grass blades on my lawn a full quarter-inch beyond what she deemed acceptable. I imagined her with a ruler in hand, measuring each blade like a tyrannical botanist. The irony was almost poetic. Her quest for order had birthed chaos, a domino effect unleashed by her very own hand. And then, in an exquisite twist, the universe answered her tyranny with perfect irony. A sudden storm, fierce and unyielding, swept through the neighborhood one evening. The wind howled like an avenging spirit, tearing through the streets with a vengeance. As I watched from my window, I saw it a massive branch from a tree in Karen's yard, splintered by the storm, crashing down onto her pristine roof. In the aftermath, the neighborhood gathered like crows to a feast, drawn by the spectacle of her misfortune. Karen, for once, had no words. The silence was a balm, soothing the dissonance she had sown. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the debris, I allowed myself a smile, a quiet acknowledgement of the cosmic balance restored. Nature, it seemed, had a way of leveling the playing field, reminding us all of its indifferent power. And in that silence, I understood the lesson. Order is an illusion, a fragile construct easily unraveled by the unexpected. The dust had barely settled on the chaos that Karen had so eagerly wreaked upon herself. Her once pristine house, the epitome of suburban tranquility, now bore the unmistakable mark of nature's untamed retribution. The grand oak had exacted its final act of defiance, its broad branches piercing through the roof like wooden javelins from the heavens. In the days following the incident, the neighborhood buzzed with whispers and sideways glances. Karen's empire of authority had crumbled faster than her shattered shingles, and I watched with muted satisfaction as she struggled to maintain her composure amidst the wreckage. Her carefully curated world had been split open, and it was all I could do not to let the irony unravel me. I had taken pictures, of course, detailed, methodical pictures of the aftermath, each jagged edge and splintered beam documented with the precision of a forensic expert. They were my insurance, my quiet rebellion against her tyranny, and though the urge to escalate, to draw the attention of the HOA or the local authorities, burned within me, I knew that patience would be my most potent ally. In the stillness of my living room, I planned my subtle counter. It would start small. A whisper of dissent in the corridors of power Karen thought she controlled. I imagined the HOA meetings, those ritualistic gatherings of mundanity where Karen would hold court, now simmering with unspoken tension. My presence there, silent and watchful, would unsettle her, a ghost in the machine, a reminder of her folly. I would bide my time. Her arrogance had been her undoing, and it would continue to unravel her authority like a thread pulled from a fraying sweater, quietly, persistently. I began to gather my allies' neighbors who had long been weary of her antics, but had lacked the courage to speak. Together, we would let her reign wither under the weight of accumulated errors and unheeded advice. In the daylight, I tended to the stump that now sat like a gravestone in my yard. It had been a good tree, strong and steadfast, until Karen's ambition had felled it. I imagined planting a new one, perhaps a sapling that would grow over time, slowly reclaiming its place. Nature, after all, had a way of restoring balance, of healing wounds with the patience of centuries. Occasionally, I would catch sight of Karen, her form shadowed against the backdrop of temporary fixes and tarps. Her expression was a study in denial and determination. The iron will that had once dominated the HOA now a brittle facade barely holding together. I wondered if she saw me watching, if she knew that her actions had set in motion forces she could not control. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, I found her standing beside the ruined husk of her house, eyes scanning the horizon as if searching for answers in the fading light. There was a moment, a flicker of recognition, as our eyes met. No words were exchanged, none were needed. In that silent exchange, I saw the dawning realization of her hubris, the understanding that she had, perhaps for the first time, lost. And so, the days stretched into weeks. The neighborhood began to heal, the echoes of conflict fading into memory. Karen's house slowly transformed, scars hidden beneath new shingles and paint. But the memory remained etched into our collective consciousness like the rings of a felled tree. In the end, it was not revenge that satisfied, but the quiet restoration of order, the knowledge that sometimes the universe had its own way of balancing the scales. The tree could not be restored, but its legacy endured, a testament to resilience, to patience, and to the quiet strength that lies in waiting. The sun dripped lazily below the horizon, casting orange hues across the suburban tableau that lay before me. It was the kind of evening where the air felt thick with the grudges and grievances of the day. The tree stump in my yard served as a stark reminder of that, a monument to Karen's audacity. Neighbors began to gather like moths to a flickering street lamp. Drawn by the irresistible lure of misfortune, I saw them whispering in small clusters, their silhouettes animated against the dimming light. The tree had fallen with a vengeance, its branches now a tangled mess atop Karen's roof, obscuring her once pristine abode. Her house, which had always stood as a symbol of her self-imposed superiority, now bore the scars of her own impetuousness. The irony was not lost on me. The air buzzed with the kind of anticipation that often precedes a summer storm. The murmur of curiosity was palpable, escalating as dusk deepened into night. People's eyes darted between the displaced tree and the damage it wrought, their faces a mix of disbelief and schadenfreude. There was a lesson here, an unspoken narrative that everyone was beginning to comprehend. I remained a quiet observer, planted firmly on the porch, cradling my coffee cup as if it were a goblet of wisdom. It wasn't the sight of the broken branches that held my attention, but rather the spectacle of Karen's comeuppance. The tree, now a fallen giant, seemed to mock her with every leaf that rustled in the night breeze. Karen herself had yet to emerge, but I imagined her expression a mask of fury and disbelief. She had sought control, only to find herself ensnared in chaos. The neighborhood knew her well. Her penchant for rules and regulations, for order and precision, had now become the very instruments of her undoing. The evening shadows lengthened, swallowing the street in their embrace. I could sense the change in the air, a tangible shift that spoke of a community on the brink of revelation. Unspoken questions circled like vultures. Who should bear the cost? Who should carry the blame? As if to punctuate the quiet storm of thoughts, a single voice broke the silence. A neighbor, whose words carried the weight of collective sentiment, remarked on the irony unfolding before us. Her rules, her ruin. A ripple of agreement passed through the crowd, subtle yet profound. It was a moment of clarity, an acknowledgement that sometimes the universe has its own way of setting things right. I felt no need to add to the chorus. Instead, I absorbed the scene, let it carve its own path into my memory. The crowd began to disperse, leaving behind the remnants of the day's drama. The street lamp's glow was gentle now, casting elongated shadows that danced in the wake of the retreating figures. I watched as they left, one by one, until only silence remained, vast and unyielding. I turned back to the tree stump, tracing its rough surface with my eyes. A chapter closed, but not forgotten. Karen's house stood in the background, a testament to the night's events. Yet, in the quiet aftermath, I sensed the dawn of something new. As the night wore on, I lingered on that porch, contemplating the intricate weave of fate and irony. The tree had fallen, but the roots of its story ran deep, and in the stillness, I found a strange comfort, knowing that sometimes justice comes not with a bang, but with the gentle rustle of leaves on the evening breeze. In the aftermath of the fallen oak's revenge, the street had become a tableau of chaos and murmured astonishment. Neighbors whispered in huddled clusters, their eyes darting from the wrecked roof to where I stood, calm and still among the fallen leaves. The once imposing Karen, now reduced to a silhouette of disbelief, paced on her driveway, her hands moving with frantic gestures. My heart, however, was an untroubled sea. Justice, in its peculiar way, had already begun its course through the symphony of cause and effect. The tree had spoken, loud and clear, an arboreal rebuke that neither of us could ignore. The legal papers had been a quiet symphony of patience and precision. I had prepared them with the same care one might use to craft a fine tapestry. Each thread of legalese woven with intention, property damage, trespass, the claims formed a neat pile on my desk, resting beneath the window that now framed an unexpectedly open sky. I took a breath, the cool morning air carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth. The tree, even in its fallen state, remained a sentinel of silent dignity. Its branches, once reaching for the heavens, now cradled the earth in a gentle embrace. The irony was not lost on me. Karen's own actions had brought this upon her home, her fortress of HOA rules and petty grievances. The community gathered like moths to a flame, peering at the spectacle with morbid curiosity. Yet, beneath their hushed conversations, I sensed a shift, an understanding. They were witnesses to a parable, a lesson in hubris brought low by nature itself. And what of Karen? Her indignation had melted into a puddle of damp confusion. Her voice, once commanding and sharp as a hawk's cry, was now a low murmur, lost amidst the rustling leaves. I watched her, this fallen queen of suburbia, and wondered if she saw the irony, the poetic justice that had unfolded before her eyes. The envelope in my hand was light, but its weight was a promise. I would hand it over with the same serenity that had carried me through this storm, the storm she had summoned with her own hands, her own hubris. With each step towards her house, I felt the ground firm beneath my feet. The neighborhood was alive with the sound of rebuilding hammers tapping, saws buzzing as if the world had already begun to mend what had been broken. The envelope slipped from my fingers into hers, the moment charged with an unspoken understanding. No words needed, just a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the tides that had turned. Her eyes met mine, a flicker of something recognition, perhaps dancing fleetingly before they dropped to the papers. I turned away, leaving her with the crumpled leaves and her own reflection. The tree had spoken, its voice echoing in the silence left behind. I walked home, my steps light, a gentle breeze at my back. The dust had long settled, both literally and metaphorically. In our small, tightly knit neighborhood, the once towering oak, my old friend that had provided shade and comfort for decades, lay fractured across the front of Karen's house, a monument of defiance against her authoritarian rule. It had taken the better part of the week for the cleanup crews to clear away the debris, leaving behind a scarred landscape that mirrored the fractures in our community's spirit. In the wake of the tree's fall, Karen's dominance crumbled, her imperious voice, once a storm that could sweep through the entire HOA meeting, became a whisper in the wind. The remnants of the tree, twisted and splintered, stood guard over her house, as if nature itself had chosen sides in this silent war. The community, once held captive by Karen's iron grip, began to breathe again. Neighbors who had been mere acquaintances became allies, sharing stories of her transgressions whispered over fences and hedges. Each tale added a layer to Karen's undoing, painting a portrait of a woman, consumed by control, yet slowly unraveling under the weight of her self-imposed reign. I found myself at the center of this unfolding drama, not by choice, but by circumstance. As the days wore on, the call of the earth and the rhythm of growing things drew me back to the spot where the oak had stood. Soil and roots, mingling beneath my fingers, whispered promises of renewal. A new sapling, a gift from a neighbor, waited patiently in its pot, ready to take root. As my hands worked the soil, I reflected on the strange alchemy of power and vulnerability. Karen had wielded her authority like a scythe, cutting down anything in her path. Yet it was her own hubris that had brought the tree down. Irony, the great leveler. The air was different now, charged with anticipation. A meeting was called, not by Karen, but at the insistence of the homeowners who had grown weary of her antics. Faces that once turned away from conflict now watched with interest, exchanging knowing glances as they gathered in the community hall. Karen arrived late. Her usual air of superiority dimmed. She took her place at the head of the table, visibly unsettled by the shift in dynamics. The chair beneath her seemed less a throne and more a precarious perch. I watched her, this woman who had been a thorn in my side, and felt a surge of something akin to pity, but only a flicker. When the time came for her to speak, the silence was palpable. Her words, sharp and bitter, lacked their former bite. She attempted to regain control, to assert her authority, but the community had already moved beyond her reach. Her voice faltered, and for the first time, she appeared small and uncertain. In the silence that followed, someone from the back remarked, "It seems even trees have a mind of their own." A ripple of laughter spread across the room, lightening the air and sealing Karen's fate. Her shoulders slumped as she realized the truth. The community had slipped through her fingers like sand. With the meeting adjourned, we stepped out into the evening air, the sunset casting long shadows that danced across the lawns. The sense of liberation was almost tangible, buoying our spirits. Karen retreated to her house, overshadowed by the lingering presence of the fallen oak. Back at the site of renewal, I planted the sapling with careful hands, feeling the earth welcome it home. As I watered it, the gentle murmur of my neighbors' voices floated over, a chorus of newfound unity. This was a beginning. The tree would grow, and so would we. Nature, after all, had a way of healing what was broken, weaving us together with invisible threads of resilience and hope.